Recording in progress. Okay, everyone knows that. Thank you very much for confirming the recording. So we have our speakers for this session are Daniel Richardson. We have Birgit Lengers from the Deutsches Theater, and we have Miriam Felton Dansky from Bard College, Annandale, New York, and we have Mario Simon from the Akademie for Theater and Digitality. Welcome all four with us, and thank you, Judith, for pinning the four of us so you can see us on the panel. I'm going to introduce you. I would like to say a few words on liveness and digital liveness, and how in the research group we've been thinking about liveness thus far. If you think about liveness and it has of course a lot to do, which just came to my mind as the previous panel was talking about participation, and how far does participation and liveness actually, you know, what are the intersections of these two concepts? When do I feel alive? So it has to do with being on display somehow, being in the here and now, being somewhere at the same time where someone else is. So there's a notion of simultaneity happening, and simultaneity to what? And here the notion of participation comes into play. And I think this is something that has been discussed in the previous panel. We could maybe continue here, but let me say a few words on liveness. As we, you know, if you usually think about liveness in theater, you associate it with the idea of a physical liveness, a physical co-presence, and this has been the most fundamental understanding of, at least in the late 20th century, theater thus far. The theater being this place of an encounter, of an unmediated encounter of bodies in space that physically come together and that physically affect each other. So the idea of the contagious as something that when bodies sweat together and come together in a space, there's something particularly happening, which we assign to theater. So this idea of theater, and maybe even this myth of theater, question mark, has been tremendously challenged by digital theater formats that have been there before the pandemic already, but that have been heavily amplified since the pandemic, due to the fact that theaters were forced to shut down and lots of theater artists went online. I guess most of you know Philip Auslander's famous book on liveness from the late 90s, where he describes liveness as an effect that is created or that is informed by a certain media historical constellation. So liveness is something, or was discovered, so to speak, once media were able to store and to record. So the differentiation or duality between being live and being recorded was invented, so to speak. And now we have digital media, the digital era, which forces us to reconsider liveness and creates new notions of liveness. And if now theater goes digital, what does that do to the idea of liveness? Auslander himself, he suggested in a more recent work that liveness should be, rather than being something understood as, you know, something being attached to a certain medium or to a certain kind of medial constellation, we should regard it as something that is making a claim. You know, a certain media constellation makes a claim of liveness, and we as the audience can accept it as such. So my question would be, what could be those claims of liveness in the digital sphere? So when do we accept something as live in a digital environment? And maybe to link it back to the question of participation, how can we create those moments of liveness where we can still build forms of connection and a collective experience? So we have 4 different perspectives today to talk about liveness and to give us a couple of examples of liveness, how they either created or thought about created liveness, digital liveness, or how you guys think about liveness. And just to tell a few words about the dramaturgy of the session, we'll start with 2 little inputs, 15-minute inputs by Daniel Richardson, and then followed by Birgit Lengers. We'll then have a little small 5-minute intermission where we do a little chat exercise together. Then we have 2 15-minute inputs by the first by Mario Simon, then by Miriam, Felton, Dansky, and followed by a Q&A, and hopefully we'll have time for a little breakout session discussion, followed by a wrap-up in the end. So let me say a few words to the people who are on the panel. Welcome to this panel. I'm so happy to have you here and to have this particular mix of people here. We start with Daniel Richardson, who is a professor of experimental psychology at University College London. Prior to that, he was an undergraduate at Magdalen College, Oxford, a graduate student at Cornell, a postdoctoral researcher at Stanford, and an assistant professor at UC Santa Cruz. His research examines how individuals' thought processes are related to other people around them. He has authored many scientific articles in cognitive, developmental, and social psychology. And he has written two popular science books, one of which is called Man versus Mind, and the other one is called A Dummy's Guide to Social Psychology. He received 3 Provost's Teachings Awards from UCL and has performed shows at the London Science Museum and Bloomsbury Theatre, combining science, music, and live experiments on the group mind of the audience. So I'm very much looking forward what kind of experiment you're going to do with us today, a live experiment. Thank you very much for being here. The second speaker is Birgit Lengers, who is a mediation artist, a dramaturg, and theater scholar. She thinks and works across borders, topographically, transculturally, interdisciplinary. She has taught at the University of Hildesheim and has worked a lot in the independent performing arts scene. In particular, she has worked as a project developer for the German theater abroad in the US. Together with Ulrich Kurn, she went to Deutsches Theater Berlin in 2009 and 10 and has worked there ever since. She is part or member of the theater management, and as part of the theater management, she's responsible for the sections of the Junges DT, Young DT, which will be a main focus in your presentation today, Birgit, and for the DT International. That's a poster that you can see from Junges DT, Young DT. She also works as a curator of the Radar Ost Festival and is very well connected in the German-speaking theater scene. She has served on many boards, in particular on the boards of the Dramaturgische Gesellschaft and the Deutsche Bühnenverein, 2 very important and impactful institutions in the German theater landscape. So thank you so much for being here and for telling us about how the Deutsches Theater has dealt with the pandemic and with digital theater. The third speaker is Mario Simon. Mario, welcome. Mario studied German literature, culture studies, film and media studies, and philosophy at the University of Bonn and TU Dortmund. He has, between 2013 and 2020, he has worked as a video artist and head of the video department at Schauspiel Dortmund. And he started working there together with Kai Voges, with whom he has created many productions, for example, Einige Nachrichten an das All, and also later the Borderline Prozession and Die Parallelwelt, something we might hear hear about today. He has also worked with other renowned directors such as Claudia Bauer and Jörg Buttgereit, amongst others. In 2017, Mario Simon was awarded the Young Talent Promotion Prize of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. And since 2019, Mario has is a permanent member of the Academy for Theater and Digitality in Dortmund, which we will hear about today. Thank you so much for being with us. Our fourth speaker is Miriam Felton Dansky. Welcome, Miriam. I know it's early, still early in the morning, or quite now, well, in the morning. Thank you for joining us from the US. Miriam is an associate professor of theater and performance at Bard College Berlin and the director of Bard's undergraduate theater and performance program. Her book, Viral Performance: Contagious Theater from Modernism to the Digital Age, was published by Northwestern University Press in 2018. And I know that we are going to hear some thoughts from your side on that publication that deals with ideas of viral and the contagious now from a kind of post or pandemic perspective. Miriam has also published articles and essays in Theater Survey, Theater Journal, TDR, PAJ, artforum.com, and Theater, where she is a contributing editor. From 2009 to 2018, she was a theater critique for The Village Voice. And she's currently working on a new book about practices of spectatorship in contemporary performance. Thank you so much for being with us. And we'll start with the first contribution by Daniel. The stage is yours. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you very much. Let me just find my slides. There we go, and move everything around. All the plugs just fell out of my computer. That's why you might have seen me panicking desperately on screen, but I've just plugged it back in, and I'm going to try not to move too much. Okay, so thank you very much for having me at this event. I've been listening in the background, and it's been very fascinating, the sort of things you have been struggling with and the solutions that you've come up with. I'm a little to the side of what many of you do. What I'm trying to do in my work is try and understand a little bit about what liveness is. My work revolves around understanding how the thought processes of an individual change according to the people around them in its broadest sense. And for a while, we've been doing these sort of experiments people thought were very strange, where we did crazy things like have someone talk to you in real life, or you watched a pre-recorded video of them, and we looked at the difference. And we've been doing this for about 5 years. And then what happened is there was a global pandemic. And of course, everyone went from being in real world to talking on little screens. And it was a very strange experience because my little experiments, which have seemed a bit odd, suddenly became our everyday lives. So it's been a bizarre inversion of looking at this. But what I'm interested in is trying to measure and capture liveness. I'm a scientist rather than a philosopher, so I begin by trying to measure stuff. That's where I start understanding it. So what we try and do is capture that difference between talking to someone live in real life or a live video versus watching a pre-recorded video. What are the psychological consequences? How do I process that information? How do I behave differently, thinking that that face in front of me can see me right now? The work I'm going to tell you about today looks at the sort of the largest scale of that, looking at what's the psychological and physiological consequences of being, for example, in the audience of a live theater. How does that change you? And can we measure in terms of the physiology or the behavior, something of this strange magical thing that we're all desperately missing for the past year, which is the experience of live theater? And my hope is that if we can understand how to capture and measure that, then maybe that'll help us think about, well, how can we put that into a digital, how can we put that into an online, how can we evolve that into these different forms of media you've been discussing? So I'll begin with by just telling you about these results that we did that began as a consultancy project. Actually, there was a company who sold theater tickets on the West End, and they wanted to know, why do their customers pay all this money for a theater ticket? If you come to London, it can cost about £100 to go and see a show. You sit in a tiny, narrow Victorian seat, and it's very uncomfortable. You have to listen to people eating next to you. Or you could stay home with your 4K television and your massive sofa and see a much better, perceptually speaking, a much better experience. So why would anyone choose to go to the theater? And of course, there's been survey work about this, but sometimes people can't give you an honest answer to how they feel. They've just paid £100 the ticket. So of course, they're going to tell you it was a wonderful experience. Can we measure in another way? Something about that feeling of being in a live performance. So rather than using questionnaire tools, what we did instead was use physiological sensors like this little wristwatch you see pictured. It's a bit like an Apple Watch, but differently. It collects various different things about your behavior and your physiology. So you might have used these things like a Fitbit and so on, and you're probably used to think of them in an exercise context about, can I get my heart in a healthy zone when I'm exercising and so on. But these things are also, because they're linked to your autonomic nervous system, they also tell you about cognition as well. And let me just take a detour slightly to tell you about some evidence we collected for that. This was a different project we did with Audible, the people who make audio books, and they wanted to know what happens to your brain when you listen to an audiobook. And we thought that's actually quite an interesting scientific question. So we set up an experiment where people listen to an audiobook passage, for example, from the Game of Thrones that you see here, or they saw a video version of it. So here's the HBO one. And they were never exactly the same, but because, you know, there are changes made, artistic changes, but very roughly, this is the same story, the same thing that's being delivered as an audiovisual thing or just an auditory story. And we measured people's physiology while engaged in this. Now, everyone told us when we said which was the most engaging, which was the most thrilling, which did you feel the most immersed in, they all said they preferred the video. But when we looked at their physiology, that's the top little squiggly line there, we found that their heart rate was higher, also their heart rate was lower, there was a bigger variance. Their electrodermal activity, their sweat, which is a measure of arousal, that was increased when they were listening to the audiobooks, and even their body temperature went up while listening to the audiobook. So physiologically speaking, their bodies and their brains are more engaged listening to the audiobook, but they said they're more engaged by the video. What does this mean? Well, our best guess is that when you look at the HBO version, they've done all the hard work to visualize that. They've hired a castle in Croatia, they've hired all these extras, they put all this effort in and presented it to you. But when you listen to the audiobook, you have to do that work. You have to imagine those people. You have to mentally simulate all of those things. And that mental simulation, that active imagination, we can read off at the wrist in the changes in your physiology. So these things are not just, am I meditating properly? Am I jogging properly? They're an indication of your autonomic system and how your brain is working at any moment in time. So we took them to Dreamgirls, the musical, which was playing at the West End. And we just measured the heart rate of about 40 people while watching these shows. And the first thing we found, if you just plot everyone's heart rate there, there's what you call the heart healthy zone, which counts as mild exercise. And we found that for about half an hour while you're going to the theater, you're in that zone of ideal exercise. You're getting a little bit fitter just from the excitement of the theater and being in the audience, even though you're moving no more than perhaps applauding or laughing. But then what we did was average over all of those heart rates. So this is the normalized average heart rate over the course of that performance. And the good thing about Dreamgirls is there was a movie version made of it. So we took that movie version and we showed it to other people. And we saw, well, is there a difference? So this is the average heart rates of people watching Dreamgirls, the movie. Now, there's two things that are of interest to us in this chart. One is that there are peaks and troughs there, and those peaks and troughs line up. Well, what is lining them up? Why is there a peak at roughly the same time? Well, that's the narrative. That's because it's the same story. That big bump halfway through, that's when she first leaves the band, if you know the movie. The second one is when I think she breaks up with her husband. There's also the manager. And then the big one at the end is when they all get back together again and have a big number. This is narrative driving a physiological response that's common to the theater and the scene and the movie because it's the same story. So we get a lineup of the audience responses because the narrative is driving that. The second thing to observe is that the peaks are higher and the troughs are lower in that live theater. What does that mean? Well, both of those are an indication of arousal and engagement. We think of the heart racing when you're excited, but also when you're really focused on an external stimuli. When you're gripped by it, your heart rate will drop, as if you're trying to quieten down your body so you can focus on something. We call them heart-stopping moments. So you see in the live theater, you have bigger peaks and bigger drops because we think that is a more engaging experience. We can also compare it to you watching the movie alone, and we get a very flat line on average. Nothing like the physiological response you get when watching that with other people or watching that live. So we can compare all these conditions and try and put our finger on what exactly is this liveness? When do we get this physiological response? We've also done this in the cinema as well. This is people watching Aladdin the movie, and this is the heart rate and the skin conductance that are changing over time. And we get a peak there in the heart rate about 3/4 of the way through. And that is the moment Aladdin gets his first kiss. And literally the hearts of the audiences flutter when this happens. So we can show that people have the same response, but we really were able to drill down and see, well, are they having the same trajectory through their physiological state space? We were able to put a number on to what degree are their hearts actually beating in time with each other? Are they coordinated in their physiological response? Not just in a rough way, do we all go up at the exciting number, but moment by moment, are we going through the same ups and downs? We use a particular technique to put a number on the synchrony. And when we did this, we found this is where the live theater and the movie really start to separate. In terms of the shared physiological response, you get a much stronger thing with the live theater. Now, this is sort of a separate, really interesting topic in psychology, I think, anyway, this notion of behavioral coordination. And we know that behavioral coordination is a widespread phenomenon. We see animals moving in time with each other. We know that if two people copy the same body language, like Trump and Scaramucci there, or my two undergraduate RAs who are flirting with each other, they didn't know the camera was on, that's two people flirting. You see they're copying their same body language. They're synchronizing their overt behavior. And we know that this is strongly linked to affiliation and liking. If you're flirting with someone in the bar, copy if they pull their ear and so on. It's a signal of social bonds. But recently we found out that it's beneath the skin. There is behavioral coordination happening as well. If you stare into the eyes of someone that you love, your heartbeats will start to synchronize with each other a little bit. This is wonderful work by Ivana Konlikova, who studied a fire walking ceremony at a village in Spain and measured the heart rate of the person walking across the coals and the people watching, and found that those heart rates coordinated between the walker and the watcher, but more, they coordinated the degree to which there was a shared family bond. So if that was your son walking on the fires, really tight coordination between your heart rates. If it was your brother, less so, cousin, less so, second cousin, less so again. You could read out the whole social structure of the village just looking at how their heart rates were synchronized. And we know teams do this as well. We know that it changes their pain thresholds if they synchronize. And we wanted to know, well, is that part of what being in an audience is like? Is it these same mechanisms of physiological coordination that are changing our experiences? So what we did was measure that heart rate synchrony in people, in this case, going to Aladdin. We compared it to people who are reading a book for the same amount of time. And we asked them, how connected do you feel to these people, these strangers walking out of the movie with you? Do you feel a connection to them at all? People felt more of a connection if they just shared the experience of watching the movie. But more than that, there was a correlation between the degree to which their physiology was coupled and the amount that they felt connected to each other. So when you're in a live experience, you seem to synchronize your physiology and experience some feeling of connection with each other. These are correlations, right? We don't know causation yet. And this is a slightly sad slide for me. This experiment we did literally the day of lockdown. The door slammed the next day. This is, I think, the last performance the English National Opera did for a year. We took them to the opera. We measured the heart rates of about 30 people. And then we asked them questions like, how captivating was this? How emotionally engaging? How socially connected were you? And we found these really strong correlations, yet again, between the degree to which their heart rate was synchronized and these measures of how spiritually uplifted they felt. So there seems to be something linking the physiological coordination with this response of being immersed, captured, but also connected to other people. Now, I said, the problem is, of course, that we haven't done any of this research for a year. So you're going to come with some wonderful suggestions for experiments. I'm going to say, yep, that's a great idea, but we can't do it because we don't have audiences back. But we haven't been doing nothing for the past year. We were able to try and do some experiments online as well. So this is a singer-songwriter who's doing a live YouTube stream. And on the right there, you see a pulsating circle. the 100 people or so who are watching online have their thumbs over their iPhone cameras like this. And the light is shining through their thumb, so it's glowing, and the camera is looking at blood changes beneath the surface that it can see in tiny changes of the blood flow. And what's on screen there is a representation of the heartbeat synchrony of everyone watching right now. And we did this because the past work seems to show there's a connection between that shared physiological response to the audience and being engaged in the performance. Well, if we're all sat in our bedrooms, we can't see each other, but what if we could visualize something of that shared physiological response, show it to people? Would we capture something of that feeling of being connected to the audience or engaged in the performance? And this was just pilot work, but the indications is, well, maybe there is a connection. So we asked people how engaging was this performance, and if they could see that visualization and they knew that that was each other's heartbeats, they said they were more engaged, they were more engrossed in the performance. Only worked for a singer-songwriter, didn't work for a poet, a spoken artist, possibly because it was distracting, or there's a different way that we are immersed in music as opposed to spoken word. This is all very early pilot work, of course. Let me see, I have 90 seconds left. So I just wanted to end on one observation. I've been trying to tell you about the psychological consequences of collective cultural experience. This video that I can tell you about some other time because we're out of time. This is the world's deepest underwater swimming pool, and these are people having a rave underwater with a DJ and people, laser lights and so on. And we found that this changed your creativity after having this incredible collective experience. Strangest weekend of my life doing that. But I just wanted to end on an observation, because I don't think this point is made. I don't hear this point enough in the newspapers, and I think it's a vital moment to make it. And particularly with research we've just done in the past 5 years, my colleague Daisy Fancourt at UCL and other people have been trying to quantify the value of the theatre and live cultural experiences, not in an abstract terms, but in terms of health measures. How does it change you? This is data from a large survey of about 5,000 households in England. This is focusing on elderly people and looking at measures of their frailty, which is a combined score of, can you make your own food? Can you get up the stairs? How able are you to get around the world? You know, if you become too frail, you might have to go to a home. So this is a compound measure of how well are you aging? And they divided people up into those who have no cultural experiences, and that can be museums or theatre or opera, versus people who go a couple times a month or more. And they found remarkable differences. You're a third less likely to become frail, a third less likely to experience severe depression if you engage in these cultural experiences. And this is all factoring out social economic status. This is not wealthy people being able to afford the opera. You take out all that, and just engaging in these experiences has a measurable health benefit. You know, this is more than taking vitamins or more than anything else. You can quantify the effect that it has on the population. We know that going to a shared experience, going to see stand-up with other people increases endorphins. It has a measurable change in your pain threshold if you engage in these collective experiences. We know that if you are depressed and you engage in a choir singing session where you respire, you breathe along with each other, and you force yourself to become physiologically engaged, that can reduce your symptoms of depression and poor mental health by as much as 60%. That is a massive effect that is greater than many SSRIs that are administered. In fact, just before the pandemic hit, there was sort of some momentum building behind these results. The head of the NHS England, our National Health Service, pointed out that we could actually save our hospitals billions if your doctor could prescribe choir singing to you. Right, the effects of that measurable and comparable to other drugs. If we could prescribe cultural experiences, that would save money and would lead to a measurably healthier population. These things, I think, need to be trumpeted all the time at a moment when this whole industry of performance in London anyway is teetering on the edge of collapse. And I think we can advocate for funding it, not in an purely abstract term that it's good for us culturally, it's good for us, our physical and mental health as well, in very measurable terms. So I just wanted to end on that particular point. And of course, if you can take all that and deliver it digitally as well, you can do a huge service to your population, not just be interesting and provocative, but you can impact mental health. I'd just like to thank my collaborators, particularly those involved in the NeuroLive project. There's a link. We've just started a 5-year project in the neuroscience of live experience. And these are my collaborators now. If you're interested in reading more, you can follow those links. I have gone over by 60 seconds, and I do apologize. But thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very, very much for this highly interesting, and I think for, you know, us, most of us are theater people, for our theater people, highly interesting inputs. Thank you so much. And don't worry about the 60 seconds, that's totally fine. Thank you so much. So let's just move on to the next presentation and juxtapose the presentation first before we go into question and answer and thinking those different inputs together. So Birgit Lengers is our next speaker. If I could ask you to present your ideas and your experiences in the Deutsches Theater, and in particular with the Junges DT. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me here, and thank you, Daniel, very much for this new argumentation you gave to us about the social and mental health. I'm going to use it very much. I'm not so thankful to speak after a native speaker because my English is quite poor, and so please forgive me. I'm much slower, but I will show you some pictures and maybe share some of the experience we have made at Junges DT, which is, like Nina said, the young section of the Deutsches Theater in Berlin. And our objectives, and I think also the way we approached and we dealt with the Corona epidemic, there's quite a difference between the young section and the old section. Now, I would like to point that out because that has to do with our target group. And like my colleagues from the How, what we do is not only to think of them as an audience, as perceiving art, but also as a partner and a dialogue partner. And what we do is we are doing theater arts with young people. Young people means they are between 12 and 22 years old. And so I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. Here we go. Okay. And I will start the presentation now. Hopefully, can you see something?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So this is the black the black slide about the DT. And I would like to point out in a more general way what was important for the theaters during the pandemic. And I think one main objective was to stay visible, to stay relevant, and be in contact with the audience, because there was this topic, this phrase, this claim of system relevant in Germany that has been discussed a lot. And of course, the cultural institutions wanted to be relevant. And what was from the beginning on important to the DT, to make theater also valuable. Many theaters opened their archives and they started to stream all the taped theater productions in a high frequency. And we didn't do that. We wanted to, what we did was we made like real-time streamings. So that has to do with this liveness. So at least you had the feeling that at this time, at 8 p.m., we start a stream and you know that there would be other people also watching the stream at the same time. And you could exchange with them via the chat. We first started with YouTube, but then we changed to another platform. And so the audience had this exchange and this feeling that they are not alone watching them. And also, of course, we were thinking about how we can monetarization of these. Is the audience willing to pay? How much are they willing to pay? And then we kind of moved to this, what kind of artistic innovation is possible with real live streaming. And and that is something that we also did at Junges DT, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this. And let me come back to what is liveness. Nina said it's like the physical co-presence of spectators and actors at the same time in the same room. And so how can we share a room? And how can we share the same time? And how can we make that feelable for the audience? Okay, and so I would like to start a little bit with one thing we did with a platform, like a little bit like Stephanie was telling, to create a home, a house where you could find different tape performances, but you kind of had the feeling that you would be in this house, and this is the digitalization of the Deutsches Theater. And we worked together with an artist duo, Cyberräuber, and they made 360-degree recordings of the theater and different rooms of the theater. And this is where we presented our Radar Ost festival. And so the audience could enter the theater and see rooms, for example, the artist entrance or the basement rooms, which are usually closed for the audience. And this was the idea, to kind of meet in the same virtual space, which you could discover on yourself, where you could decide where to go and where to watch different performances. And you could go, for example, on the main stage, or you could be in the basement, and here you can feel the performances. So this was the first attempt to create a room, a home, a house for the audience, and not just use a website with links. And of course, there were like public spaces where you could, after the performances, meet with other audience members, and you could exchange what you have seen. And now I would like to come to Junges DT, where all my heart blood is is in, and what was the main objectives for us. First of all, we said digital theater is more than a substitute. It's not something we just use because we can't play live right now. And the other thing was, we wanted to stop sending, and we wanted to start listening to our target groups. What do they need? What do they want? And how can we really communicate and have a dialogue? And we wanted to think of theater not as just producing theater, like a theater factory, or think of it as a product, but think of theater as a laboratory, where you could discover new artistic ways and maybe new hybrid forms. So we thought of this pandemic time, all these months, of a time to discover. And we try to combine digital and live. And that's what we said. It doesn't have to be a contradiction. And so what we did since March 2020, we've been developing a great variety of formats, especially with young people, with digital natives, like the colleagues from the HOW, that enabled cultural participation, education, artistic and social interaction, despite the restrictions imposed to all of us by the corona pandemic. And during the lockdown, the youth section of Deutsches Theater explored and discovered new aesthetic potentials and new ways of storytelling. And what was this? What did we discover? The first motive was because when the pandemic came over us, we were rehearsing with youth clubs and with different productions, and all of a sudden everybody was kind of locked in their homes and in their rooms. So we said that one main objective is that we have to use platforms against boredom, against loneliness, and for community. So the social aspect of theater was really important. And what we did was we went live. And since all of our young people are, of course, very used to the social media, we went live, and these were our stages on Instagram, and we invited guests there. We had cooking shows, we had little performances there, singing contests, and all different things. Once a week, we had like a live open stage there on Instagram. And this is maybe one of the main things we discovered, that different interfaces and different platforms could function as stages. And we really tried all of them. We created fake websites. We invented a WhatsApp drama. We used Zoom for performances. And we used Instagram, we used Telegram channels. For example, there's one performance we did. No, it's not really a performance. It was like a podcast for wonderful, nice, and valuable moments during the pandemic. And you had to follow and join a chat on Telegram, and the young people posted little audio clips and video clips there where they shared nice moments. And of course, we used YouTubes, and we made like audio shows and podcasts, even with people in other cities. For example, these where you see the windows, it's kind of related to Hitchcock's this psycho, I don't know the English title, but so they were observing out of their windows what was happening on the streets, and they created like a mystery and a thriller from that. And it was an audio which you could listen to on YouTube, on iTunes and SoundCloud. So this was one important thing. How could we reuse and redefine different interfaces and platforms as theater stages? Okay, maybe we can have a look at this. This was our first web series we did during the hard lockdown, Zoom in Romeo and Julia, and it was rehearsed via Zoom, and it was performed via Zoom. And okay, maybe you, Ramona, you can show us the trailer where you can see the young people as the oops.
Heute Nacht riefst du mich an. Ich gab dir meine Nummer. Doch ich ging nicht dran. Da sprachst du deine Nummer. Zwar weiß ich, wie du heißt, doch zeig mir, wer du bist. Sag mir, was du denkst, zeig mir, wie du fühlst. Ich weiß jetzt, wie du heißt, doch zeig mir, wer du bist. Sag mir, was du denkst, zeig mir, wie du fühlst.
So, and that was like a series with 13 different episodes, and yeah, and it was like broadcasted from the different homes. Okay, that was one example. I'm gonna continue now with my presentation. 1 second. Okay, And sorry. Okay, and another very interesting thing was a live performance. We did 7 days, 7 new plays, new dramas, 7 monologues live on Instagram, and of course with lots of chats and interaction with the audience. And we related to this pressure and life is not predictable anymore. So the director and also the author, she wrote a mini drama for one player, which was a monologue of a celebrity, and it was sent by email to the actor or to the actress, and so they had to learn it and to stage it, and they had just a few hours, and they didn't know what it's going to be, and then at 11 p.m. they went live on Instagram, and they were performing this monologue 7 minutes, and then there was this exchange with the audience, which was very exciting. And I can tell you, Daniel, the heart rates were very high of the audience too, which was of course mostly like friends and family and community. But we had, like you see, over 13,000 clicks, for example, for this Time to Die, Tom Cruise. And another more elaborated experiment was Metamorphosis. It was an immersive live stream theater, and it was broadcasted from the theater live. And the actors were in these dressing rooms of the actors, and they went online, and the spectators, they went on a website, and they could switch between these 7 live streams, and they could interact via chat, but also call the actors and find out what was going on in this creepy space. And they decorated the dressing rooms in a very individual and very fantastic way, and so they were broadcasting live. And it was very interesting because it was like a mystery also. And let me go to one other really a live stream, and it's called Selbstvergessen, which could be translated as "you forget yourself." And it was with young people which have grandparents which suffer from dementia. And they did a big research, and first we rehearsed via Zoom, and then we rehearsed live. And they did a research and found objects and made recordings and did interviews with their grandparents, or they asked family members about this, their disease and their forgetting and losing. And it was, the undertitle was from stopping and from starting. And this was it was combined with their ideas looking into the future. And this live stream was from the beginning conceived as a live stream, hybrid theater, video arty hybrid before the rehearsal started, and especially with the topic of remembering, memory, forgetting, it seemed for us very important not to preserve this digitally and thus make it just available on demand. And the shared memories at this moment, at the same time with the audience in this Selbstvergessen, actually they took only place in this moment, and they are ephemeral and can be remembered or can be forgotten, just like other theater performance. And this made this event very unique and very fragile, very risky, and very precious. And there was no fixed text vision, only the sequences of the scenes were fixed, and of course the technical cues. And we thought at best, and hopefully the audience will feel that they are participating in something that is being made in this moment for them. And so it was for us the attempt to transfer what theater is all about into the digital sphere, this singular togetherness at the same moment. And maybe I want to, we had, after each performance, we had a talk back with the audience, with the live audience, and we asked in the chat, did it make a difference to you that today was live or not, and not a previous recording? And the answers show a little bit what the value of liveness can be. What they said, it made it unique, and it was a real theater experience. There was a different excitement, like Daniel said, a higher heartbeat, and it was like memories that only happen once. And especially with the Q&R talk, they found it very impressive. And some even said, well, if it hadn't been live, I wouldn't have watched it. Yeah, and experience all the mistakes made it even more human and personal. So this now moment of theater was kind of, you know, receivable for the audience. And yeah, maybe we can also take a look into this performance. And then I think I should skip the last one. What you can see here is the view behind the scenes. First, it was very, you know, closed, like a theater performance. Then all of a sudden, one of the actors took the camera and they had
Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als mein Opa krank wurde. Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als ich bemerkt habe, dass es uns alle betrifft. Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als ich bemerkt habe, dass ich langsam Verantwortung übernehmen muss. Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als ich bemerkt habe, dass es meine ganze Familie beeinträchtigt.
And here you can see how,
ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als ich meinem Opa helfen musste.
With the overlayers.
Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als ich meinen Opa nicht mehr erkennen konnte. Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als ich bemerkt habe, dass mein Opa sich auch körperlich verändert. Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen geworden, als ich bemerkt habe, dass das Dorf, in dem mein Opa sein ganzes Leben lang wohnte, gar nicht so toll ist, wie ich immer dachte. Ich bin in dem Moment erwachsen.
Yeah, okay. That should be maybe enough. And okay, my conclusions. Last. Where is it? Can you see this one?
No, we can't see your slide right now.
We see.
You can't see it?
No, we see ourselves, so to speak. The zoom is doubled.
Which is sort of interesting.
Zoom is doubled. Okay.
You are screen sharing, but it seems like you're not screen sharing what you want to screen share. Yeah, the right screen.
Okay. now?
I just
No.
killed your screen sharing. I hope that was fine.
Okay, you can't see it.
No. You
Okay,
want to?
I can just read it very briefly to you.
Great.
So the summary. Yes. So the summary would be what we tried was to discover and repropose digital platforms, tools, and technologies for these theater performances. What we wanted to do is to provide a digital space for interaction between the actors to really, act together and share this with the audience. We tried to invent hybrid formats. We wanted to extend the theatrical event into the digital space, impart digital skills, and service accessibility and extend the reach. So that was what we wanted to achieve. Okay. Okay, I'm finished.
Great, thank you so much, Birgit. Thank you so much. I think regarding the time, we should proceed with the discussion. However, if people feel like I would like to ask you one little question that you could, while we're continuing, put in the chat, which is, what makes up digital liveness for you? So if people want to answer this question in the chat, we can come back to this after the next two presentations. What makes up digital liveness for you? What's the specificity of digital liveness for you, right? Thank you very much, Birgit. I think this, we have already heard so many claims of liveness now, being together, physical exchange, and the question, of course, and how far can we transfer this into the digital sphere? And you've talked about the experiments that you do at DT with this kind of transference. And you talked about mistakes that have been made as forms of authentication as well of liveness, maybe showing the making of things, involving people through social media and discovering the theatrical qualities of social media. So that's all highly interesting. Thank you so much. Let's move on to another example from Mario Simon from the Academy of Digitality in Theater. Mario, you have made quite lots of experiment with digital liveness as well, and you're going to present in particular one specific way of being together digitally and live, digitally and physically, that might also resonate with what we've been hearing from Daniel today, with watching films together for it. So Mario, thank you so much for being here and to give us some insights into the works of the Academy.
Yeah. Thank you, Nina, very much for the introduction. I will start my PowerPoint presentation right now. And what I was thinking, what I would like to propose with this is the watch parties for theater and in a digital way. So maybe we can discuss this later, but I'm really a fan of watching theater like this. So I'm Mario, and for today, I'd like to give you a short introduction of myself and how this fits into an academy for theater and digitality, and how watch parties can save the liveness of art in the digital area. So right now, I am working at the Academy for Theater and Digitality in Dortmund, founded in January 2019, which has a 4-column model of researching and supporting art in terms of technology and vice versa. But before I go deeper into this model, I'd like to give you a small glimpse of the emergence of this wonderful playground. From 2012, I've worked at the Schauspiel Dortmund under the directorship of Kai Voges, and during this time, we experimented a lot with new technologies for creating art, digital narratives, and contemporary use of digital tools. During this time, we already got the reputation as the laboratory for the digital age, but all this production we made had significant similarities in terms of production. As you can see here, whether it was the planned sequence camera robot we created for Das Fest, or who nearly for 2 hours never stopped, and I had to control every movement like flying a spaceship. This was the first production, my first production ever, where I worked with the camera on stage, and I didn't get the job because I was such a good camera guy. Instead, I was good at it because the controls of the robot were almost the same as a game I've played a lot when I was a child. The game was called Descent, and you had to fly a small spaceship through narrow corridors, and you can still find it in the internet or see it here down on the right in the presentation. It was a kind of unknown gamification for me, but I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to see this. And here on the next slide, you can see 4 examples of the work I've done during the last years. I've put them in one place because I'm too lazy to switch PowerPoint all the time. I hope this is okay for you. So let's start in the upper left with the human machine knot of 4.48 psychosis by Sarah Kane, where the actors were attached to microcomputers and sensors delivered as data that directly influenced the media that could be seen on stage. The rhythm and sound of the music, cues that were hit by a heartbeat, and various real-life data that influenced the video appearance. Why this is an example for liveness? We had a live stream with this play in 2014 for a discussion called Theater in Live Stream, Curse or Blessing in Berlin. So this play was only streamed to the audience presence in the discussion due to some legal reasons, but we wanted to create a special experience for the remote audience. So we added 7 cameras to the 5 already used cameras in the play and had a team that was only there for making an experience that differs the show or shows more to the audience that was not sharing the same room. I don't know if it was a good or a bad sign that we got a lot of feedback from Berlin now saying that they really want to come over and see this play live. So an example, as an example for digital narration on a regular stage was das Goldene Zeitalter on the upper right. Director Kai Voges was directing this piece live, and we had developed over 100 patterns which he could choose from. So every evening was completely different, and we had a lot of people coming again because they wanted to know what would happen today. One of the critics wrote that seeing this play was like watching Kai Voges surf through the internet. So I guess the best known work from the Schauspiel Dortmund in the last years was the Borderline procession on the lower left, which was invited to the Berliner Theatertreffen in 2014. This play was influenced by Douglas Rushkoff's book Present Shock, When Everything Happens Now, and the photographer Gregory Crutzen. This piece was filled with so much content that the audience could never be able to grasp everything that happened on stage. It was a huge success and really fun to play. We built the stage in an interim because we had to flee out of the Schauspiel due to some fire-related safety stuff, and we knew we could never take back this play after we turned to the Schauspiel, so we wanted to find a way to capture this kind of performance. This is why we also teamed up with the Cyberräuber as Birgit and created a virtual reality version of Borderline, which was called Memories of Borderline, as you can see on the down right. It was not enriched like the live play, it was more like a memorial with pieces in it, but this had a different, unique value. Unfortunately, there was no time to go on with the development of this, and I'd love to see where this would have gone. And the last example, the most complicated thing we have built during the directorship of Kai Voges was the parallel world in the middle of the presentation, where we have connected 2 theaters, the Schauspiel in Dortmund and the Berliner Ensemble. We set up a fiber connection over 480 kilometers between the 2 stages, where 4 video streams and 64 audio streams were shared between the 2 theaters, so that we could be in the same play at the same time in a completely different place without delay. The actors could speak orally and sing songs together. This is something you could hardly achieve via Zoom or Skype. This play had a very special moment of liveness in it, because before we started, we had 2 cameras directed at the audience in the auditorium, and on the screen you could see the Berlin audience in Dortmund and vice versa. Over the different performances, the audience developed a very interesting way of interaction. Big signs appeared, to greet the other audience, or even in both cities, they made appointments to greet each others via the screen. At the premiere, we started with the usual entrance time, but with the forthcoming of this, we stretched this audience connection to over 30 minutes. This was the best proof that what you could see on the screens in the stage was happening live. Now to something completely different. Here are some pictures of the Academy so that you can get an idea of it. All these examples I told you before had in common that we were thinking it would have been better to have more time, a space to try out the technology, and people with knowledge to help out. And this was the first route of the Academy for Theatre and Digitality. We were all surprised how many supporters we could gain in such a short amount of time with the European Regional Development Fund, the German Federal Cultural Foundation, the Ministry of Culture and Science of the State of North Rhine-Westphalia, the City of Dortmund, and the Vilo Foundation. They all stood by so that we could start our first column with the fellowship program in the second half of 2019. You can apply to a fellowship program with the project, and our 12-member jury chooses 5 to 7 projects per every semester. Up to 3 fellows can work at the project at a time, and we will provide a place to work, the technology you need for your project, experts, programmers, etc., money for your daily needs, and a place to stay in Dortmund. The main goal is that you have time and the resources just to concentrate on the development of your project without having a deadline coming up. We'll provide opportunities to present your work, but you're not forced to do it. We don't have any kind of agenda for the matters of the project. It can be content research, the development of a technology, or the preparation of a play performance that is coming up. It just has to be in the field between performing arts and digitality. We're not a production house, so we won't provide a full-fledged theater performance, but the often missing time and resources to prepare for this. With 3 short examples, I'll give you a glimpse of how projects can look like. The first example in the upper left is Max Schweder, who developed an interactive shader design for performing arts, which he now uses for a bunch of dance or performance projects. He's also working on a project where he teams up with a deaf dancer who uses body stimulation and the visuals for his performance. The second example on the upper left, down left, sorry, is a multi-user VR theater technology developed by Gloria Schulz and Alexander Nahm, who try to take out the loneliness out of the virtual reality. They have managed to make a small theater play about fleeing from Eastern Germany with 2 actors and 2 participants in VR. They were sharing the escape experience in VR together with the actors who were playing with them to maximize the immersion. I'm really looking forward to where this goes. They are still going on with the development of this. The third example is Sarah Buser, who is working in augmented reality in the overlapping and mixing of digital and physical spaces. She explores augmented reality and location-based software as theatrical and narrative tools. Based on China Miéville's novel, The City and the City, she's investigating parallel realities, translating situations, and fragmented narration. The second column of the Academy is the advanced training for the theater staff or people who are interested in learning new ways of working. For example, the props department can learn how to use a 3D printer to make props or masks for theater plays. And the third column is the field of education. Right now, we're developing together with the University of Applied Science in Dortmund a master's degree called Digitality in Performing Arts, which will start in 2023, hopefully. Our latest and fourth column is an international co-production center where artists or companies can rehearse with the support from the Academy. So right now we're in an interim at the Theater Dortmund, but in September 2022, we will move in our own building in the harbor of Dortmund, which is under construction right now, as you can see on the lower right. And in the last part of the lecture, I'd like to talk about the liveness aspect in digital performance. For me, digital theater is not something that replaces theater or just copies the real theater. It just increases the possibilities to narrate a story on a stage, no matter if the stage is analog or made of pixels. But there's always this voice that differs between the real and the digital theater. But I like the idea of building bridges. So what makes watching a play in a theater so special and is missing online? It is the personal connection to the audience and the connection between the audience. I'm sure there are much more scientific explanations for that, and I'd love to hear them afterwards, but for now, let's just pretend there are only these two aspects. For the personal connection, there are a lot of solutions for the interaction between the stage people and the sitting in front of a stage people, or monitors in this case. But I'd like to show you the one that convinced me the most. The Academy teamed up with the opera in Dortmund to create a play where the audience could influence by voting how the play goes on. This play is called Persona. Under non-corona circumstances, it would have been done by hand or by a simple electronic voting tool, but like so many other events, we had to move to a digital presentation. So we were looking for a good way to let the audience participate and interact with the play. And we have found reaction.link. You can see how this looks on the smartphone in the lower right. Reaction Link is a low threshold tool for interaction. You can choose from simple emotion icons over multiple choice questions, directly asking questions via text box, or even creating word clouds and a lot of other stuff. All this is possible without installing an app, because Reaction Link is a responsive website that works on every device with the browser on it. This tool has made a real connection to the audience and subsequently a more immersed experience for them. If you are planning to work with interaction in a digital space, you should definitely have a look at this tool. And I must underscore that I'm not related to any of the makers of it. I'm just convinced about it. So it feels like the connection between the audience is something that hasn't surpassed the breakout rooms in some Zoom sessions. If you have examples where more happened, please let me know. I'm really interested. And what I like about going to the theater is, beside what I can see and hear on the stage, is being there with others. I cannot remember going alone into a play. Even when I was sitting alone, I knew someone in the audience or made a new connection to the person next to me. So how can this be useful for a digital performance? I would say we need to make more watch parties. Watching a piece of art and immediately being able to get thoughts from others about what can be seen, even if it's not verbally, is a great value. And I'd like to propose the idea of promoting watch parties for online events. It can also be done by conferencing tools like Zoom, or better, like watching football games on a couch with drinks. Now there should be enough space for it. So what do you think about this? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mario, for proposing new ways of digital liveness and new possibilities for coming together, and also for thank you for the summary of what the very, very exciting and promising work you guys have been doing at the Academy. For time reason, let's move on to Miriam, and we'll have a Q&A after that. Miriam, may I ask you to give your input here? Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me? Nina, can you hear me? Okay.
Perfect. Works.
So my prompt is only slightly different, or rather my interpretation of the prompt is only slightly different, because I've been thinking about theater as something that is viral, contagious for a very long time. And I'm today going to talk a little bit about how the pandemic has shifted my ideas of the viral, some of the artworks that I have found important, which are not necessarily artworks that were made during the pandemic, but that I think reveal something about liveness, about contagion, about performance or co-presence. And in fact, some of what I'd like to explore today is how new the newness really is that we're examining. How new is this, as we're talking about a shift to digital theater? We all are aware that hybrid theater is in fact not new, and theater that is engaged in a media ecology that's much larger than simply an interaction between the digital and, say, the live co-presence of embodied humans in the room, that is also very old. So I'm going to talk about a few of those things, and hopefully there will be some connections to the really wonderful previous talks in this session. As Nina mentioned before, I published a book called Viral Performance in 2018, not knowing that there would be a pandemic 2 years later. And the book starts from the premise actually that theater and performance have been viral more or less from the beginning, wherever we decide to position that beginning, and that a long and diverse history of artists and thinkers have proceeded either explicitly or implicitly from the idea that, in the words that I use in my book, are when people gather, something spreads. And there are lots of ways that that gathering can happen. And often the something that spreads is a feeling, whether ecstasy or rage, revolutionary consciousness, the desire to purchase a product, or imitate a dance move. And not only the advent of the digital, but almost every new media form has been accompanied by excitement, but also by anxiety about the method and the speed in which it disseminates ideas and stories, information and feelings. So this happened in the early 20th century with radio, it happened with television, it happened with the early internet, it continues to happen. And one of the things that I found particular about the experience of the last few years then was not so much that we were in a media ecology, but rather that we were in a media ecology in crisis. And that when we think about who's present, who's watching as an audience, it's not just that someone may not be physically co-present in the room with a performer because COVID restrictions, but they may not be physically able to watch because there's a massive crisis that is gripping everyone, whether it's affecting one's ability to earn a living or maintain housing, or physically affecting one's health. And so given that, the first place that I turned in the spring of 2020 was not to digital theater, it was to Artaud, who many are probably familiar with as the kind of progenitor of the idea that the ideal theater is like the plague. And I started rereading that really famous essay that he wrote almost 100 years ago. And what struck me was how very closely Artaud seemed to be telling the exact story of what had unfolded during the early COVID crisis. Not just his discussion of contagion, but also, and I apologize if I'm repeating and everybody's recently reread this essay, but if you haven't read it in a while, he begins with a story about how the plague arrives in Marseille, France, on a ship. And he talks about how the plague in Marseille ostensibly came from Asia. In fact, he calls it the Oriental plague, the original virus. While nearly in the same breath, he clarifies that in fact, the virus was not introduced to Marseille from Asia by the ship that arrived, but in fact was already there and was somehow ignited or catalyzed by that ship's arrival. And so thinking about the story of early spring of 2020, and the echoes of US-based anti-Asian and anti-Asian American racism hardly need to be explicated, but simply the idea that the plague and the contagion are nearly always something that in crisis we place elsewhere. We insist that they have originated elsewhere, even when we don't know that for a fact. The idea, the image, the story of the ship offshore harboring something that is contagious, but not in a linear or clear way, resonated with stories like, if people remember, Carnival Cruise Line's Diamond Princess cruise ship that was quarantined off of Yokohama because it had COVID cases, or when New York City tried to implement hospitals on empty cruise ships, nearly 1,000 beds empty on the USS Comfort that was docked in New York in early April. So these resonances led me to think about contagion as something that is brought up as a cultural story that is adjacent to, but not the same as, the stories we tell ourselves about liveness, about digitality, about media. And so that I'm really sharing kind of in shifts or in my own thinking, how I proceeded from one part of COVID to the next. And so the first part was thinking about what does real epidemic, if it tells us something about theater, what does it tell us? And I think one of the things it tells us is that theater has some relationship to crisis, and that considering COVID theater must take some account of crisis. And then I think the second thing is that there is always some form of embodiment. There's always some implication that the body, and not just the body, but physical infrastructures or architectures have, even when something seems as immaterial as a computer screen or a digital interface. And so, for instance, I was very struck, Mario, by your description of the cable that connected Berlin and Dortmund. So there's a physical infrastructure, even when we want to pretend that something is so immaterial as the digital. I'll mention, and here I will, I'll do a little, have a very minimal compared to my colleagues. I have a very minimal presentation, but people might be familiar with Circle Jerk, which was in the US probably the paradigmatic live streamed COVID performance. It recently was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Drama, which was shocking, I think, above all to its own creators, because they did not think they were making a drama. But Circle Jerk was a piece that combined digital media as performance platform, digital media as theme. It followed, it satirized essentially white supremacy in queer male communities. It follows a group of men on a fictive, quote, gay men island who set out to hatch an evil scheme using viral memes. So it's taking place during a pandemic. It's thinking thematically about memes. And it's also satirizing internet culture, Instagram, and its life on social media was really integrated into its life as a performance. And it really achieved such a precise diagnosis of its moment. It was live streamed initially in the fall of 2020. It returned for an encore presentation in January. And as I mentioned, it was a runner-up for the Pulitzer Prize in Drama. And the same group of creators were responsible for a number of other really well-known and widely watched presentations in the US during the pandemic. Ratatouille, the TikTok musical, for instance, and then This American Wife, which is a Real Housewives satire that recently was live streamed. So this group of creators captured something about a moment, but the other thing that I wanted to share, and this resonates, I think, with a lot of what has been shared already, is that while Circle Jerk was self-conscious and intentional in its relationship to the spectator, it inevitably, one was watching on a screen, of course. We have known for a long time that hybrid forms of theater and media, ones that involve embodiment, materials, real-time and space, as well as living together with digital recordings, forms of streaming and social media, that these are not contradictory, that they live together. And although Auslander may be the most famous person to think this through, I also wanted to cite Sarah Bay-Jung's really wonderful 2012 essay, Theater as Media, Some Principles for a Digital Historiography, which I'd be happy to share with people. And she offers a kind of set of provocations for thinking about theater as something that always occurs within and in relationship to other media. And she says, particularly, the distinction between the performance and its digital record is negligible, a provocative statement given the history of debates around liveness. And then to continue with her quote, or rather that they are both mutually dependent and constitutive parts of a larger network. So I share that not because I think the idea is new, but because I think it is always useful to remind us that 8 years before the pandemic, here's an instance of someone thinking about what this ecology or what this larger network looks like. So I also, I offer this partly out of the US context, which I think from what I'm hearing is very different, or at least somewhat different from contexts in Europe, in Germany, in the sense that there was in the US a lot of anxiety about a pause in theater, about theater not happening, not existing, and the need that I see and that I think many others see to resituate this impulse to talk about a total pause in theater, or to try to taxonomize exactly that X or Y was theater that happened during the pandemic and other things were not. And so to do this, I wanted to actually talk about two other artists. I haven't timed myself. I hope I'm okay to talk about two other artists. They're both at least both of these projects at least began before the pandemic, but offer, in my opinion, really significant examples of thinking about what the viral is and its relationship to embodiment. And through that, we may have thoughts about liveness and digitality as well. So the first of these that I wanted to share, and this is also something that were I to write my book again today would be really significant to it, was the Chilean feminist collective Las Tesis, who became known for a public performance about rape and police violence that was performed initially in Valparaiso, Chile in fall 2019, but it became particularly famous over the following few months as feminist groups around the world began to post their own versions of the performance on YouTube. So if you look up on YouTube, Las Tesis, Un Violador en Tu Camino, you will find versions of this from New York City performed in front of the Trump building on Fifth Avenue. You'll find Turkish women lawmakers performing it in the legislature building. You'll find all kinds of versions of this. And so this is in a way at this point a very old school version of what we might call going viral, right? The idea that here's a performance and other people took some of the choreography, took some of the language, perhaps translated it into their own language and re-performed it in their own time and place. And so questions that this brings up are, first of all, does this kind of YouTube model of going viral, does this still exist? One might think that it doesn't, but this very recent example suggests that maybe there is some value to considering this really what may seem like a clunky kind of virality. And then also that Las Tesis in early 2020, just as the pandemic was starting, created a collaboration with Pussy Riot. And they made a manifesto against police violence that was widely shared online. And they really were extending this critique of silencing, of police brutality, of silence around rape culture to a kind of international audience. Whereas the original performance by Las Tesis, all of the choreography and the costume elements, such as the blindfolds and the green flags, are very specific to Chilean national politics. This earned a kind of level of notoriety, which again is something that we associate with virality and contagion in that kind of original going viral on YouTube sense, because the video contained the words with words which translated in English to fire on the police. And the Chilean police organization, the National Police Organization, understood this to be an incitement of violence against the police and sued Las Tesis. And so this gained a huge amount of international attention and international renown, and the sharing of petitions on behalf of Las Tesis. And so the repeated gestures, the choreography from this original Un Violador en Tu Camino, moving not only across screens, but through bodies as other bodies take on that set of choreography and turn it to their own contexts, suggests something to me about how we are thinking about contagion in this moment and liveness. It also, I think, goes back to what Daniel was saying at the beginning of the session about that even when we are perhaps watching on a screen, there is an embodied element to watching, and there's a physiological element to watching. So just thinking about a couple of other elements, one of the things that I have been thinking about a lot during both before and during the pandemic is what the relationship is between the viral and anonymity as a form of digital identity. Because as we all know, anonymity holds a lot of kind of new meanings in the digital world. There's capital A anonymous, there's presumptions of anonymity when one is say commenting in a digital space. Then of course there's digital mass surveillance, which removes all sense of anonymity. And then when COVID arrived, we began to have a form of not necessarily intentional anonymity, but visible anonymity in the sense that half of our face was covered at all times in public. And this is, to me, a visual representation and something that should be visually thought about as part of how we experience contagion and how we experience identity, in fact, because it relates to the recognition of one another as humans. And it also relates to, in a really much more kind of practical sense, what it means to perform live if one does, wearing a mask. And how that relates to the very kind of really kind of what's at the core of acting and connecting with another person on stage. I think I am running short on time, so I'm just going to share one other artist who's been really important to my thinking about contagion. And this work completely predates the pandemic, but I think relates deeply to some of what we might want to think about in terms of liveness, who is Anika Yi, who is an artist who makes installation work. And this is a piece from one of her shows from 2017. And what she does is work with physical elements that are drawn from human bodies. So meaning bacteria, sweat, things that can grow in petri dishes, things that were exactly the opposite of what we were engaging with during the pandemic. And so therefore reflected to me really deeply. So Immigrant Caucus, which this is a photo of that piece, involved 3 cans. You can see the little canisters at the bottom on the floor that she installed in a hallway at the Guggenheim. And each was spraying a kind of emission into the air. And the emission was a spray that she created in collaboration with scientists at Columbia University that combined the sweat of Asian American women and the emissions of carpenter ants. Saul Anton, in a review of this piece, points out that this pairing, quote, confronts viewers with stereotypical ideas about Asian immigrants as hardworking but lacking in individuality, end quote, and adds that the emissions from the cans, which he reports smell musty but not bad per se, quote, constitute simultaneously a promise and a threat, one that now lives inside you. And this made me think a lot about how we consider affect also. And I know we've been thinking a lot about how affect and emotion are transmitted through screens or potentially not transmitted through screens, or how live co-presence with other members of an audience enables a certain experience of affect that perhaps happens differently if one is either alone and or watching over a screen. In the transmission of affect, Teresa Brennan writes that, quote, the atmosphere or the environment, she's just talking about the affect or the environment of a room, literally gets into the individual. And in the time of COVID, this was exactly what we could not have happened. We were precisely anxious about something that was invisible and airborne. And so we had all of these barriers that we set up over our faces, between our bodies, and indeed in separating ourselves out into little Zoom boxes. And so this idea that what's contagious might be something that we can't see, but that can actually get inside us just the way, in a certain way, performance can, was really compelling to me. The other piece that I'll mention that's even a little earlier by Anika Yi was in fact about epidemic. This piece, which was an installation she did at the Kitchen in New York City in 2015, You Can Call Me F, was a response to the Ebola crisis in part. It consisted of, as you can see, a series of clear plastic, essentially quarantine tents that were installed. And in each of those tents was a group of receptacles. You can sort of see their little metal bowls in various spaces that held bacteria she had gleaned from the cheek swabs of about 100 women. You walked through the space and you smelled. And I'll report that when I visited the installation, nothing smelled that strongly. But when I read the work of other critics who had gone earlier in the life of the installation, they had been overwhelmed with the scent. And so although this was not a performance, it did in a sense live and perform over time. And this complicates our ideas of what is live also, I believe, as does the final part of her, the same installation, which is called Grabbing at Newer Vegetables, but it was part of You Can Call Me F, in which she took the bacteria swabs and she made a giant petri dish that grew and blossomed. And you can see this kind of like growing bacterial floral mold that's growing in the gallery, and she spelled out this name, You Can Call Me F, in bacteria that had also been taken from the women who gave her samples. I'm going to read a quote from Jane Young Kim, who wrote about this show that I think really sort of speaks to what Yi was doing. She says, to name something is to claim the power of framing. Yi's truncated title, meaning You Can Call Me F, and then what does that F stand for? Spelled out in bacteria, undoes the clinical lens through which we prefer to consider disease. It reinvigorates the mystery and the power of infection, end quote. So I'll end there, but just by saying that in this particular moment, we have perhaps felt all too deeply the mystery and power of infection, the limitations on our ability to bound our own bodies, the fine-grained distinctions that defy any easy binary between, say, physical proximity and co-presence and bounded distance. So things like masks, plexiglass half walls, 6-foot distancing. These are both preventative measures against contagious spread and acknowledgements that there will be contagious spread. And so thinking about theater as a contagious force, when we consider what liveness is, one of the things that I'd like to just add into the conversation that I think all of these examples do in different ways is that liveness almost always includes some form of embodiment, but it may not be the physically embodied human actor that we experience. It might be bacteria, it might be something we can't see, and that the embodiment might also be infrastructural. It might be a massive cable that's transmitting something from one place to another. And that contagion, again, may not work exactly in the kind of linear way that we expect it to. It may shift, it may change, and it may live both in screens and in bodies at the same time. So I'll be there, and looking forward to talking. I'm going to stop the screen share.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for bringing back in the content of you know, the reason why we have to rethink, or we are rethinking theater at the moment in terms of liveness, which is the COVID crisis and the whole idea of contagion and virus and danger and crisis that is connected to it. These were 4 very rich and also very different attempts to talk about liveness or digital liveness or hybrid liveness. We have 20 minutes left, so I would say let's dive into the discussion and a Q&A session and skip the breakout rooms. Maybe let's just to summarize, I've just you know, out of this variety of thoughts on liveness, I just wrote down a couple of terms. I would like to repeat also, quoting from what people have said in the chat regarding, you know, what do you consider as digital liveness or liveness in general. So there has been voices that said, like, it has to do something with, you know, we had mistake was one thing, vulnerability, is something that isn't technically too polished or edited, the possibility of failure, an event where I'm being seen, being heard, being, you know, noticed. Then definitely the notion of that's been important, especially in the first and the fourth presentation, embodiment, a kind of exchange happening, being to the fact, Daniel, you mentioned the fact that people are somehow together, synchronizing each other, sharing a space. Miriam, you enlarged that by saying, you know, it has to do something with embodiment, but that can also be an infrastructural embodiment. Another notion that's been coming up is simultaneity, the idea of, for example, Parallelwelt, the one example that Mario brought up. Simultaneity could also happen not only you know, in a short amount of time, but also in longer terms. There has to be some kind of proof of being or feeling live when people are brought together in chats, for example. Birgit, you mentioned a couple of examples here. There was the notion of anonymity in digital liveness versus maybe you know, a kind of authenticity in co-present liveness, for example. So these are a bunch of terms that we've been talking about. Are there any questions from the audience? Please, I hope I can see you. Maybe if you have a question, I can't see any hands for now. So please just open or switch on your mic and ask a question. Are there any questions?
Maybe.
Hi, I go ahead then.
You go ahead.
Sorry, I also switched my camera. So, hi,
oh, yeah.
Anna.
Now
on again. Yeah, I was thinking. So, if Daniel has, it's somehow very sad what you're saying, because what you're saying is that the engagement of the public needs this live space together in the theater. Or how do you read your own data? Because if I read your data right, that's what you're saying.
Yes. So, well, let me put it differently. We know this special thing, whatever the hell it is, happens in live theater, and we're trying to measure and capture it. And once we figure it out, maybe then we can port it into digital stuff. I don't think it's not magic. It's not, you know, there must be a signal there that people are responding to. But the mystery for me is, what the hell is that signal, right? If you talk to any performer, they say they can sense the energy of the crowd. But what is that actual signal? Are they looking at them moving? Are they hearing them? Are they smelling them? We have no idea. But if we can figure out actually what is that information that's being exchanged between them, we have smart enough technical people, and we've seen some great examples, that maybe we can port that signal into this digital.
And do you have any research ideas for how to find out what it is?
I have some, but I can't do them because audiences, it's been the most, you know, it's been a bad year for many ways, but this is one thing I think that I have just a hunch about, and I don't have data, so I feel very bad saying it, is I think that I think we underestimate sound a little bit, and we tend to focus on the visual and getting that high definition and interactive. But I think as an experience, you're relying on these auditory cues much more. And part of the difficulty of things like this is you don't get that murmur from the audience right now because your mics are muted or they're not muted. And I think if someone could figure out how just to give you a sense of, you know, a vague titter when you make a joke or an audible gasp when you say something, if you could port that into it, I really think that would hit the experience a little more. But that's completely a hunch.
No, but if I may, I have thought on that. I did a performance just some weeks ago where the public were all wearing masks. So, and I'm visually impaired, and I work a lot with the sound to feel this energy, or what is this energy that you feel? So other people, I think, use their eyes without knowing it. I don't have any periphery, so I can't. So I think I use sound. And the performance I did when people were wearing masks, I really couldn't feel them as I normally do, because they were all wearing masks, and so I didn't hear them.
Yeah.
So I think it's very much true that particularly, so people who don't have any problem with vision, they use their vision a lot, but I use my hearing a lot. And I think people with vision do too, just they don't understand that they're doing it. Just like I normally also don't think, you think you're feeling energy, but you're not. You're hearing, you're seeing, you're smelling, you're everything.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, and I think hearing is. I would be really interested to hear about deaf people, how they perceive public because they don't hear them. That would be also very interesting. Sorry, I was spinning out there a bit.
There are three contributions: Stephanie, Birgit, and Ramona.
I think Nina, Birgit wants to say something to what Anna was saying, no?
Okay, Birgit, do you want to answer directly?
I just wanted to share one thing, because I think we evaluated the differences between live streams and just, you know, real-time streams and streams from the archive, and the interest is really extremely higher if the audience knows that it's happening right now. They are not sharing, they are not in the same room, but they know, and they have the feeling that this is happening for them. They feel in some way, they feel like meant. And the things you have said, Nina, about something can go wrong, it's skin in the game, it's risk taking. So that's what makes theater or circus and everything still interesting, because it could really go wrong. And I think, so this is, for some reason, it still makes a huge difference, and it makes it more valuable. It's a lot more expensive, and you need a lot more resources, and somehow the audience appreciates that, I think.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I think there's still the question of, it seems like there's still the question of in our head of hierarchy. What liveness is you know, the most impactful, or does the level of impactfulness actually has to do something with liveness, or is liveness maybe something that is, you know, that is liveness so obviously connected to some kind of you know, excitement? But let me go on. There are three questions, so it's Stephanie first, Ramona, and then Anja, please. Stephanie.
Thank you. Thanks for these really these were fascinating. I took so many notes and was like they were very generative. And this is really following on Anna's question. When I really liked also the order of these presentations, in part because Daniel, you know, when you were sharing your data, one of the things I thought about a lot was conversations I had with theater makers, especially early in the pandemic, about the collective breath between the audience and the performers, and how much we missed the collective breath, which is not. It can be audio, but it often isn't. It is a sense, but you know, that kind of sense that we're in a rhythm with one another. And then Miriam, in your presentation, the idea that the collective breath is dangerous and toxic, and in fact, we can't have it even if we could sit together, because that can infect us and you know, be deathly. And so is that a word? Deadly. And so to Anna's question, and this is maybe more of a comment, but I was thinking about it kind of throughout this entire segment, which was, you know, how can we get at that aspect of liveness that is different from the visual, different from what we hear, what we see, the animated, I'm doing this, you know, because you know I'm alive when I'm doing this, right? And I guess it does come back to maybe that word alive. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit now, but I'm thinking about Mario and Birgit and how maybe, you know, you've had challenges or obstacles in trying to create that sense of aliveness in your live virtual work, right? And so I don't know, that was a little bit rambly, but I was thinking so much about breath and how breath is the one thing that is very hard to translate in the digital, and how we might try to do that, or what's the substitute, or maybe there is no substitute, but other ways that we sense each other, so to speak. Anyway, I just also wanted to say thank you again. These were fascinating.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to respond to that? Otherwise, Ramona would like.
Sorry,
yeah.
My computer is failing. Just to observe, there's a work by a guy called Fred Cummings, who is Irish, I think he's at Dublin, who studies joint speaking. And he makes these wonderful points that speaking and chanting together is actually the oldest form of recording information. It predates writing. And if you look at, there's some Sanskrit texts, I forgot what they're called, but the authoritative version is the chanted one, not the written one. It's a lot about sort of the emotional power of it. He's a psychologist as well. But yeah, he thought a lot about the power of these joint speaking. And I actually ran an experiment once where my participants chanted along with each other. And I'm very sort of non-religious and atheist, but if you just get people to chant for about a minute, it's spine tingling. There is something just about that co-speaking that really taps into a really strange phenomenology. I found it quite bizarre to sort of play around with it. But again, that sort of sound, I think if we can get people, and of course, call and response in a religious context has a huge history. I think, again, if you can tap into that with technology, that would capture many of these things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ramona, so we have these two more contributions, 2 more questions by Ramona and Anya, please.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was really fascinating. It was really just, I don't know, wonderful how it came together in kind of even better ways than we had imagined ahead of time. So I just wanted to kind of one thing for Daniel, if you wanted to check on the sound thing, there is the Encounter by Simon McBurney, which is a sort of binaural audio piece, which he's streaming, and he's also doing live with an audience live in the theater. It'd be really interesting to see whether the physiological difference of like people being there, or whether at that point it doesn't make a difference so much anymore. I saw both. I mean, I went to both, and to me, I thought it was a lot more negligible, the difference of experience that you had on YouTube or on Facebook going to the live stream than it was going to the theater, because you sort of like were orally in a very intimate other space. And then to Mario, I was really interested in the sort of, I think it was the 4th column, the sort of international sort of dimension. And one of the things I think I've been really interested in is this potential of sort of like rehearsing across geographies digitally, right? And whether that's something that you are enabling in that context, because obviously that's something we were sort of like in a super basic way toying with when we asked you all to rename yourself according to geography, because that's so much what people put in the chat when they go to a performance. Like, hi, I'm here from like whatever, Berlin or Dortmund or wherever else. And so I'm really interested in what you're doing in that 4th column with the sort of international corporations, whether that's part of that, because I feel one of the questions we would have asked you in the breakout room was, where is digital liveness? What other things can it do than other forms of liveness? Or is it different in that regard? And maybe that would be a sort of different moment, actually, that kind of like geographic sort of condensation that is happening there. Yeah, so that far I think I have loads more questions for everybody else, but I think I also really want Anya to say something, so I will shut up.
So what I can say about the digitality does something special to you. What I really liked about making the parallel world was that it also not was just a play that we played together. We also had two ensembles really growing together, and it was really weird. In the last week of rehearsing, it was like, oh, Kai Voges was always running from Berlin to Dortmund. So he was rehearsing in the morning in Dortmund, then going into the train and rehearsing in the evening in Berlin, and vice versa. So he just went there. And you just got so confused, and he was saying something to everyone, okay, here's some critics and all this stuff, you do it like this. And you would think, okay, I would go to him. And then you realized, oh, he's not here. He's in Berlin. And you didn't realize this because it was so always there that we are connected. And so I was so often wanted to talk to people that were not in the room, but I thought they were there. So this was something that I've never experienced before, and not yet. So this is something what we want to try to in the first column. The first column is, first of all, this is a place where you can rehearse with technology and knowledge you normally don't have. So if you say, I've got the idea, I want to do something in 360, and I can't afford going and buying a camera, or I don't know how to use it, then you can go there and rehearse for a play that you can. But we have a cooperation with different universities and other places where we want to connect them, like we connected them with the. We're working together with. I don't know if you know R-Bone. This is a company that helped us a lot making these connections between different theaters. And what we were thinking of was a network with very fast internet connection between the theaters, so that you could just be together like we were together in the parallel world, because this is something that has a very great value to it. So if you have ideas, we're in the planning phase of column 4. So if you have anything special, just write me a mail or just ask me, call me, whatever. I'm open for every suggestion you make.
Great, thank you very much. Last question is by Anya, please.
Okay, thank you for that. I perhaps just want to add a perspective to the question or discussion about digital liveness and what I also call digital theatricality and theatricalization from the perspective of the medical humanities. I'm using digital liveness and theatricality as a means to communicate patient data in critical care units and to critical care consultants. And I wondered, and I want to pick on Miriam's presentation, and I was really glad for her reminding us that theater has always been viral, and that contagion is really a cultural story. And I wondered whether we can think through liveliness in digital environments by asking how the culture of crisis during the pandemic has changed cultural imaginaries of theater, and how they might have shifted, and what are the values and images and beliefs that people now are really attaching to this kind of engagement with this through the screen and through this quite hybrid and augmented space. Yeah, not fully fleshed out question, but I'm getting there.
Great, thank you very much. Miriam, do you want to answer? Or
I'll try to really briefly just respond a little bit. Anya, that was really fascinating, and I would love to, maybe we can connect. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your work. I think that the idea that there's something, physical, medical, embodied, in the air, that this is entangled with our experience of the digital encounter in so many different ways. And I think, one of them that may seem so negligible is that we think of the screen as a transparent interface, but in fact, when we sit in front of our screen all day, it's covered in particles. And so what are those particles? Are they dust? Are they our breath? Are we coughing? Right? What is actually in between us and what's through the screen? And how is that part of the experience? And then at the same time, just thinking about the long-term impacts of so much digital liveness in the world, in the sense that we think of digital theater as something that sort of costs less or is somehow lower impact in a certain environmental way, but it also relies on giant servers that we just don't physically see because they're not present with us in our house. So what is that cost, and what does that mean? There was one other piece of my response to what you said that is not coming to my mind right now. So I'm going to stop right there, but I'd love to connect with you later and talk more, because that was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ramona has a very, very urgent last question, so please go ahead.
Sorry, I'm pushing myself in there. It's pretty bad, actually. But I just wanted to ask Birgit, so, because you had that slide where you said, we really tried out all these different platforms, and we realized all of those were somehow, it was possible to do theater. That it's really impressive how many different things you did in that short period of time as well. So, and my hunch as well, experiencing some of this is a certain one. So my question to you is, do you feel that maybe liveness and the experience of liveness is really much more one that one has to rethink according to platform, and it really depends on the platform that you're on? Kind of like, to me, liveness in WhatsApp is seeing the ... when somebody's typing, rather than the video that gets posted, for example, or something like that. So yeah, any thoughts on that? And any of the ones that you maybe, is there one that you find particularly exciting, aside from the live stream, which I think the DT has done such incredible work on making, creating something really different and something really innovative with. So not just a filmed version, but you did really a lot of exciting experiments with that. But aside from that, of the other platforms that you've been using, is there one that you would particularly like to do more with?
Well, it kind of combines both sections you had. The first section about interaction, and the second one about liveness. And of course, this has a lot to do with each other. And I think what theater can do, because theater can do anything, it can swallow everything, all tools, all platforms and everything, and to combine these things and think of hybrid formats, I think that's very exciting. And what we did, the last example I skipped was a little bit like an escape game. So it was interactive. It was based on Zoom, but we were using all kinds of different interfaces, Telegram, handy calls, and a website. And so you could interact, and we had one actor, a little bit like a host now, and you had to find something out. And what I like about Homecoming, it was also combined with something real analog. They were sent out before the performance started, like little school books, and there were hidden cues, and you had to solve a riddle and to find somebody, and you had to really collaborate and work together. And I think these things, to kind of cross all these borders between interfaces, platforms, between digital and between gaming and theater, that could be something for the future.
Thank you very much. I have a feeling that our discussion thus far is hovering between these two narratives. On the one hand, we have the narrative of the loss, the theater of physical co-presence that is not there anymore. And people talked about the substitute digital being a substitute. And then on the other hand, we have this other narrative that is trying to think in a world that has already, that is mixing up digital and physical, the physical and digital realm anyway in our everyday life, and in how far this can be not only represented but actually used as tools and in theater, and thus changing a general understanding of theater. Thinking about the term post-digitality here comes to my mind, and it's a weird term because it actually suggests that it's something after digitality, but what it actually aims at is the constitutive intermingling of the digital realm and the physical analog realm, and that I can't really distinguish this anymore. So I think we are kind of between these two narratives of loss on the one hand and these new possibilities of the need to change the idea of what theater can be. And I think liveness here is a great vehicle to think about these two narratives.
Yes, and yeah, sorry, but look at the youth. Look how easily they switch between these things, and they have like many screens and live, and it's very like normal. And so maybe that's the future. Sorry for interrupting.
No, Birgit, that's fine. And maybe that leads me to the very last question that I'm really, and how far do you think that these experiments that you've been doing, do they affect, especially with the young DT, Birgit, and how far do they affect the program of the Deutsches Theater? I mean, the youth theater being something kind of on the side program, but now being put in the foreground, does it have an effect on the long term? And it certainly does in terms of, and I see Mario, the Academy of Digitality and Theater being, you have this huge new building that is being, built for you. So it seems like there are these attempts of turning this into the more kind of adult professional theater world, but and how far, Birgit, in your case, does it impact the general program of the Deutsches Theater?
Well, of course, I would wish it would do it more than it does, but it does, of course. And as I said maybe before, we think of ourselves as a laboratory, and we have the chance to really do some experiments and a little bit off the radar. But but I have the feeling that the dramaturgs and also the artistic director, they really are curious, and they look what we find out, and they think or they try to implant some of the things maybe into the repertoire. And and we won't go there. I mean, doesn't make sense to go back and say, okay, now everything is analog and we just throw everything away what we found out, but it will take time, of course. Structures are moving slowly like icebergs, mountains.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we take a little break now, and we meet back in 22 minutes at 6:30 for the last session. Thank you all speakers. That has been highly interesting and inspiring. And I hope you can stay for a bit and join the later discussions as well. So thank you so much.
And can I just add very briefly, if you need a break now, I mean, anyway, to pee or do whatever else, that's totally, but if you need a break from Zoom, I totally understand. So let's just leave the thing and walk around. But if you are keen on more digital, whatever, then you could also meet with us on wonder.me, and Judith is going to put the link in there. She has just put the link in there. You just have to do it through Chrome, Google Chrome. You can't do it on Safari. And then if you, instead of doing a breakout room, want to just chat with anybody who appears there, we've got some different rooms there, beer gardens and wine bars and whatever. So we can also do it at the very end, but if you want to, there's 22 minutes. And if you want to check it out at some point, feel free. And otherwise, I can also understand the urge to meditate or move now. So, we'll see you at 6:30.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.